The gate board flipped to canceled at 11:52 on a Wednesday night, and every single person in that terminal disappeared in under 4 minutes. I counted. 1 second, there were maybe 60 people scattered across those blue plastic chairs, jackets piled on armrests, laptops open, kids asleep across their parents' laps. Then the announcement came through the overhead speaker, flat and mechanical. The kind of voice that delivers bad news the way a photocopier delivers bad copies, without any interest in what it's doing to you. Flight 2247 to Nashville. Canceled. Weather delay. Next available service, Thursday, 6:15 a.m. 60 people became 40, became 20, became 6, then 3, then 2, and then it was just us. My name is Callum Reed. I am Chijiste Pierwszy. I design commercial interiors for a firm out of Nashville. The kind of work that sounds glamorous until you explain that most of it is choosing the right shade of gray for a bank lobby and arguing with contractors about ceiling heights. I travel maybe 8 or 9 times a year for client site visits. I know airports the way some people know their commute, not fondly, just well. Every terminal starts smelling the same after a while. Burnt coffee and whatever they're running through the ventilation system that's supposed to smell like nothing but doesn't. I've been in Seattle for 3 days, a hotel conversion project that had been rescheduled twice already because the client kept changing his mind about whether he wanted an open floor plan or a traditional layout. By the time he decided, I was tired in the specific way that has nothing to do with sleep. The tire that comes from spending 72 hours solving other people's problems while your own pile up quietly at home. I want to tell you up front, I'm giving you this story from the other side of it. From a morning a long time after that gate, after that hotel, after everything that came next. So when I tell you I didn't understand something at the time, believe me. The man sitting alone in gate C-14 at midnight had no idea what was coming. He just knew his flight was canceled and his phone was at 11% battery. Her name was Nora Voss. I didn't know that yet. What I knew first was that she was still there when everyone else had cleared out, sitting 2 rows over from me with a carry-on upright between her boots, a paperback open in her lap that she was clearly not reading, and an expression on her face that I could only describe as controlled impatience, like someone used to things going sideways and equally used to not letting it show. She had dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested it had started the day properly and given up somewhere around hour 10. She was wearing a navy blazer over a gray shirt and looked like she'd come from something professional and was headed somewhere that had been counting on her arriving tonight. I went back to my phone. 11%. The nearest charging port was down the hall, which meant leaving my bag. I looked at my bag. I looked at the empty terminal. I looked at the woman 2 rows over who was very pointedly not looking at me. If you want to charge your phone, she said, without looking up from a book, there's an outlet directly behind you. 3rd panel from the left. They paint them the same color as the wall, so you don't find them unless you're looking. I turned around. She was right. There it was. How do you know that? I asked. I've slept in this terminal twice. She said, still not looking up. You learn where the outlets are the same way you learn where the good vending machines are. Out of necessity, not interest. I plugged my phone in and sat back down. Twice I said, weather delay once, mechanical issue once. She closed the book, which told me she hadn't been reading it. I fly this route 6 times a year, Seattle to Nashville. The weather window between October and March is unreliable, and the airline knows it and keeps scheduling the last flight of the night anyway. She finally looked at me. You're going to Nashville too. It wasn't a question. She'd seen my boarding pass, or the gate board, or both. Commercial interiors, I said, which was a strange thing to lead with but felt accurate. You? Supply chain consulting. She said it the way people say it when they've answered the question 1,000 times and stopped expecting the follow-up to be interesting. I work with manufacturing companies, help them figure out why things aren't moving the way they should. And you're in Seattle for her. A client who waited 4 months to tell me the problem I'd been hired to solve had actually been solved internally 3 weeks before I flew out. She said it without particular bitterness, just flatly, like reading a line off a report. So I sat in a conference room for 2 days confirming everything was fine, and then came here to fly home, and now it's midnight, and I'm sitting in a dark terminal talking to a stranger about outlet placement. Callum, I said. She looked at me a beat. Nora, that was the whole introduction. No handshake, no small talk ramp up, just 2 tired people and a canceled flight and a terminal going dark around them at midnight. Here is what I noticed Against my better judgment, she was funny without trying to be. The kind of funny that comes from being honest when most people would have softened the edge off a sentence. I've been married once, briefly, badly, not recently. And in the 2 years since, I hadn't been paying close attention to anyone. I developed a fairly reliable system of not noticing things I didn't want to be responsible for noticing. The system started failing somewhere around the second conversation about whether the vending machine down the hall had real food or the kind that just looked like real food. It had the second kind. We both already knew this, but we stood there in front of it anyway for 10 minutes, making a case for crackers over trail mix while the terminal hummed around us like an empty aquarium. It was past 1 in the morning when she said it. We'd migrated back to the gate seats, both of us with phone chargers running, bags propped between us on the row like a border neither of us had drawn on purpose. I'd gotten coffee from the only kiosk still running, a sad little cart near security manned by a teenager who looked like he'd lost a bet, and brought her one without asking, which she accepted without thanking me. Just took it, which I found more comfortable than if she'd made a whole thing out of it. There's a hotel, she said. I looked at her. 8 minutes from here, the Clement. It's not fancy, but it's clean and it has blackout curtains, which matters more at 1 a.m. than a minibar. She was looking at her phone, not at me. I've stayed there both times I've been stuck here. The shuttle runs until 2. That's good to know, I said, assuming she was passing along information the way she'd passed along the outlet tip. Then she looked up. They might only have one room left, she said. I checked while you were getting coffee. There's a convention in town, some kind of engineering conference. Everything in the area is gone except a king and a double, and the double just got booked while I was looking. I waited. I'm not suggesting anything complicated, she said, and her voice had gone to that flat, efficient register she used for professional information. I'm suggesting that sleeping in a real bed for 4 hours is better than sleeping in those chairs, and that splitting a hotel room between 2 adults who are both fully capable of behaving like adults is more practical than either of us pretending the floor here is acceptable. She paused. But you can say no. I'm not going to make it strange. I looked at the gate seats. Blue plastic, metal armrests designed, it seemed, specifically to prevent any position that approached comfortable. The ceiling lights above us had been dimmed to half, which gave the whole terminal the feel of a building that had already given up on the night. I looked at Nora Voss. I'll get the shuttle information, I said. Something crossed her face. Not relief exactly, more like a quiet confirmation, the look of a person who'd made a practical calculation and had it come back correct. The Clement Hotel shuttle arrived at 1:18. We were the only 2 people on it. The driver, a man named Dennis, who had the energy of someone who had seen everything and been impressed by none of it, did not comment on the fact that we were strangers splitting a hotel room at 1 in the morning. He just drove. The room was on the 4th floor. 1 king bed, a pull-out couch that looked like it had survived a structural event at some point in its history, and a window that looked out at a parking structure. The blackout curtains were as advertised. I'll take the couch, I said. Nora set her carry-on down and looked at the couch the way you look at something you're trying to give a fair assessment and cannot. You're taller than the couch, she said. I'll manage. It looks like it folds into a position that's technically not lying down. She turned to the bed. King-sized, properly made, with the particular aggressively neutral quality of hotel bedding everywhere. We're adults, she said for the second time that night. The bed is large enough that we could put a rolled blanket down the middle and neither of us would know the other was there. Nora, practically speaking, I'll take the couch, I said. Get some sleep. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't entirely read, somewhere between amused and something else she wasn't going to name. Then she nodded once, said good night, and that was the end of it. I lay on the couch for 4 hours. She was right about the angle. I slept anyway, the way you sleep when you've been awake long enough that discomfort stops being relevant. In the morning, the alarm on her phone went off at 5:15. I was already half awake, lying there in the dark listening to the parking structure outside, doing nothing. She came out of the bathroom 15 minutes later, pulled together in the way that takes effort, but isn't supposed to look like it. Blazer back in place, carry-on zip. She stopped when she saw me sitting up on the couch. I was going to let you sleep until the shuttle, she said. I was awake. Couch. She almost smiled. Almost. Then she held out a coffee cup, the small cardboard sleeve from the in-room machine, which meant she'd made it while I was still in the other room. Terrible, she said. Tastes like it was brewed in regret. But it's hot. I took it. Thank you. She sat down in the one chair by the window, her own cup between both hands, and for a few minutes neither of us said anything. Outside, the parking structure was going gray with early light. The city was waking up in the particular quiet way cities do at 5:30 before the noise arrives and covers everything over. Can I ask you something? She said, yeah. Why interiors? I looked at the cup. My father built houses, I said. Framing crew. He used to take me through the shells before the walls went in, when you could still see how everything fit together. What was holding what up? What would last? And what was just making it look finished? I shrugged. I like the part after the structure is done, when a space gets to decide what it actually is. She was quiet a moment. That's a specific way to think about it. What about supply chains? She considered. My mother ran a small clothing business. Nothing large. Local manufacturers, local shops, 12 people on payroll. When I was 16, a supplier she'd worked with for 9 years changed a contract term without telling her. By the time she caught it, it had cost her 4 months of margin. Nora turned the cup slowly in her hands. She closed the business 2 years later. Not entirely because of that, but that's when the thread started pulling. A pause. I like finding the thread before someone else pulls it. We sat with that for a minute. Here's the thing about 5:30 in a hotel room with someone you met 8 hours ago. There's no performance available at that hour. You're too tired for it. Whatever you say comes out real, because you don't have the energy to sand the edges off at first. You live alone? She asked. 2 years, I said. Divorced. I don't, she said. And then immediately after, live alone, I mean. I have a roommate. My sister. She moved in after her engagement ended last year, and neither of us has gotten around to acknowledging that it's become permanent. Do you want her to be? She thought about it honestly, which I appreciated. I want her to be okay, she said. Whether she stays or goes. Then, quieter, I think I've been spending so much time making sure everyone around me is structurally sound that I forget to check my own walls. I looked at her. She was looking at the window. That's a specific way to think about it, I said. She caught the echo, and this time she actually smiled. Not almost a real one, brief, and a little surprised at itself. The shuttle came at 5:50. His name was Marcus Hale, no relation, and he was waiting at gate C-14 when we got back to the terminal, which told me he'd been on the same canceled flight and had chosen, for reasons I couldn't determine, to sleep in the airport rather than find a hotel. He was in his late 30s, the kind of polish that reads as expensive without being loud about it. And he stood up when he saw Nora the way you stand for someone you know well and have already rehearsed standing for. Nora. He said her name with the ease of long practice. I've been calling you. Nora stopped walking. Not dramatically, just a half-step reset, the way you adjust your footing without wanting anyone to notice. Phone was on Do Not Disturb, she said. Marcus, this is Callum. Marcus looked at me with the particular calibrated politeness of a man trying to determine what category to put someone in. How do you two know each other? Canceled flight, Nora said simply. Marcus looked at our bags, at the fact that we'd clearly arrived together on the shuttle, at some calculation running behind his eyes, right? He smiled at me. She didn't mention anyone. We met at midnight, I said. There wasn't a lot of prior opportunity. Marcus turned back to Nora. I want to talk before we land, he said. About the Kessler account. We can talk on the plane, she said. I'd rather talk now. He hadn't moved from his spot, planted like a man who expected the conversation to come to him rather than the other way around. You've been avoiding it for 3 weeks, Nora. The timeline they're asking for, you know it's not realistic. If we go back to them with what I'm proposing instead. What you're proposing, she said, and her voice was pleasant in the specific way that meant it was not, would cost them 6 months they don't have because it protects our margin instead of solving their actual problem. It protects the relationship. The relationship is fine. Their supply window isn't. She picked up her carry-on from where she'd set it down. I've already drafted the revised recommendation. I'll send it to you before we board. Marcus looked at her for a moment, then at me, then back at her. When did you start drafting client recommendations without running them by the team? When the team started prioritizing our comfort over the client's outcome, she said, without heat, without sharpness, just plainly, the way she'd talked about her mother's business an hour ago on a parking structure view. I'll send you the draft. She walked to the gate seats and sat down. Marcus stood where he was for another second, doing something with his jaw, then moved toward the other side of the gate. I sat down next to her. That's my business partner, she said before I could ask. I gathered. He's good at his job. She opened her bag, pulled out the paperback from the night before. He's also very good at making sure his version of good at the job is the one the room accepts as the only version. How long have you been partners? For years. She looked at the book without opening it. Long enough that I noticed the pattern. Not long enough that I've decided what to do about it. I thought about what she'd said in the hotel room. Finding the thread before someone else pulls it. You already know what to do about it, I said. She looked at me. I know, she said. That's the uncomfortable part. The flight boarded at 6:40. Nora was in 14A. I was in 22C. Different rows. different sections, the natural end of an accidental night, dissolving back into separate lives the way it was always going to. She stopped at my row on the way to hers. Not dramatically, just stopped. Marcus was 3 steps behind her, already looking at his phone. Callum. She said my name the same way she'd said it at the gate the night before, like she was confirming it was correct. The hotel recommendation, the Clement, she said, if you're ever stuck here again. I'll remember, I said. She nodded. Then, the draft I mentioned, the Kessler one. She said it like she was thinking out loud more than talking to me. It's the right call. I know it's the right call. I just needed somebody to sit with it for a second without trying to change it. It sounds right to me, I said, for whatever that's worth from someone who designs bank lobbies. She smiled. The real one again. It's worth something, she said. Surprisingly, Marcus appeared at her shoulder. Nora, we should get seated. She looked at him for a second, then back at me. Goodbye, Callum. Safe flight, Nora. She walked to 14A. I sat down in 22C. Outside the small oval window, Seattle was doing what Seattle does in November. Gray and honest about it. No pretense of sun. I want to tell you the flight landed, and we went our separate ways, and that was the end of a perfectly decent story about a canceled flight and a sensible decision about hotel rooms. That's the version that requires nothing of anyone. That's not what happened. At 35,000 feet, somewhere over Oregon, a flight attendant came down the aisle and stopped at my row. Are you Callum? She asked. I looked up. Yeah. She handed me a cocktail napkin, folded once. From 14A. I opened it. I'm going to send Marcus my recommendation as written. Wanted you to know since you sat with it. Also, supply chain problems and interior design problems aren't that different. Structurally speaking, both come down to what's load-bearing and what's just decoration. I think about that. If you're ever in Nashville with 2 hours you don't know what to do with, Nora. Her number was below it, written in the clean, precise hand of someone who takes notes for a living. I folded the napkin once and put it in my jacket pocket. I didn't write back immediately. Not because I wasn't sure, but because some things you hold for a moment before you act on them, the same way you stand in a room before you start drawing plans for it. Just letting it be what it is first. 3 weeks later, I had a site visit in Nashville. My own city, my own project, a restaurant conversion in the Gulch that had been on the books for months. 2 free hours in the afternoon before the client dinner. Her reply came in under 2 minutes. There's a place on 12th, good coffee, terrible lighting, ideal for people who don't want to be seen having a first conversation that doesn't have a category yet. Today's Zolklok. I was there at 2:55. She was already inside. Back corner table, 2 coffees already on it, which I later found out she'd ordered based on a detail I'd mentioned on the plane about preferring dark roast, the kind of thing most people don't write down, and she'd apparently just kept. We talked for 2 hours. Not about the flight, not about Marcus, not about the hotel room or the couch, or any of the logistics of how we'd ended up in the same airspace at midnight. We talked about her Kessler recommendation, which had gone through as written and had already started producing results. We talked about the restaurant I was converting, a building from the 1940s with original tile work under 4 layers of flooring that nobody had known about until I pulled up a corner. We talked about her sister, who was staying in the apartment and had, 2 weeks earlier, signed a new lease on her own place 3 blocks away, which Nora said felt like a good thing, the right distance, close enough to matter, and far enough to be a choice. You were right, she said about halfway through the second cup. I knew what to do about Marcus. I'd known for about a year. I just needed someone to stop trying to talk me out of knowing it. What did you do? I restructured the partnership agreement, she said. He's not going anywhere, and neither am I. But the decision architecture is clearer now. Who signs off on what? What goes to the client versus what stays internal. She turned her cup in her hands, the same gesture from the hotel room. It's easier to work with someone when they understand where the load-bearing walls are. And where are they? She looked at me. The client's outcome. Always. Everything else is finishing work. I thought about my father walking me through house shells. What's holding what up? Yeah, I said. That's right. We closed the coffee shop down. Walked out onto 12th Avenue in the early dark. November air doing what it does in Nashville. Cold enough to matter without being unreasonable. We stood on the sidewalk, and she looked at me with the same direct, unperformed attention she'd used since the first moment at the gate. Was this a date? She asked, without apology for the directness. I think it started as a first conversation that didn't have a category yet, I said, and became a date somewhere around hour 1. That's a reasonable timeline, she said. Is that okay? She thought about it honestly, which I come to understand was just how she answered things. Actually thinking, not performing consideration. I've spent a lot of years being very practical, she said, solving the structure before I let myself feel anything about the room. A pause. I think I'd like to try it in the other order for once. Try what? feeling something about the room, she said, before I figure out all the walls. I walked her to her car. She drove home. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute after her taillights went around the corner, Nashville humming around me. My phone in my pocket with a contact saved under Nora Voss with a small note underneath it that said dark roast, window seats. Never reads the book she's holding. We had dinner the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that. Marcus restructured without drama. The Kessler account became one of her firm's strongest client relationships inside 6 months. The restaurant I converted won a regional design award the following spring, which meant nothing to me specifically except that the original tile I'd found under those 4 layers of flooring ended up in 3 different design publications, and I took a photograph of it and sent it to her, because she was the only person I wanted to tell first. She texted back a photograph of a coffee napkin. On it, in her precise handwriting, load-bearing. Knew it. That's the one I kept. Here's what I want to leave you with tonight. I almost didn't buy that last coffee. The one from the sad cart by security. I almost went back to my seat and let the night close around me the way it was closing around everyone else in that terminal. I didn't. And sometimes that's the whole story. Not the dramatic choice. Not the obvious turning point. Just a cup of bad airport coffee carried 2 rows over, and a woman who told you where the outlets were without being asked, and a night that turned into a life neither of you had scheduled. Nora told me once, much later, in the kitchen of the apartment we eventually shared in Nashville, that she'd see me walk in and sit down at gate C14 and made a decision in about 40 seconds to see if I was worth talking to. What was the 40 seconds? I asked. You looked at the chairs before you sat down. She said, like you were checking whether they were actually going to hold you. Most people just fall into them. That's an architect thing. I said. I know, she said. That's why I liked it. So let me ask you 2 things before you go. Have you ever been stuck somewhere? An airport, a waiting room, the wrong side of a delay, and ended up in a conversation that changed something? And is there someone in your life who saw how you sat down in a room and decided that told them enough? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story got under your skin, hit like so I know you're out there. Subscribe and turn the bell on. I'll see you here next Sunday with a new story. Same time. Bring the coffee.